Joining us now to talk about all of this, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell and Troy Mayor Ethan Baker, a Republican. We thank you both for joining us here on The Pulse tonight. And I want to begin just by saying this. I don't care if it's President Biden, President Trump, or whoever's in the Oval Office. They don't get to take the microphone away from family members who are mourning at this hour. And so we're not going to begin with those divisive comments. Instead, we're going to begin with the investigation. I want to thank both of our esteemed guests for joining us here. By the way, we should mention Mayor of Troy. It's not a partisan position, but he is a Republican who often talks and works across the aisle with others. We thank you for joining us. And of course, Congresswoman Dingell, we thank you. First of all, from a federal level, from a congressional level, give us an update on what we do know about where we're heading with this investigation right now.
I mean, first of all, I have to say, like everybody else, our prayers and our thoughts and our love is with these families whose lives were suddenly turned upside down. The fact of the matter is we don't know a lot right now, Roop, and I think it is very important that we let those that have the that know what they're doing and are supposed to be investigated this and get the facts. We know how many people were there. They're still in the process of recovering bodies, the fuselage, and I think that all of this idle speculation is helping nobody.
And right now, the NTSB has the difficult task, of course, of not only finding these bodies and returning them to families for closure, but also trying to figure out how this all happened. Ethan Baker, you spent some time in Washington. I just saw you there for the inauguration. This is a tight-knit town, of course, as Congresswoman knows and you know. And right now, that is really important to say, hey, in leadership, we need to pay attention to the investigators right now. Isn't that true?
For sure. And I want to echo the Congresswoman's comments. I mean, 67 lives expected to be lost, but the ripple effect on the families and the stories that we're going to hear about each of those individuals is awful and something that I can't even imagine, frankly. And but the investigation will be key, and it's so early, and this happens every time there's a tragedy like this. The conspiracies and the speculation starts, and you see a story on the news, on the internet, and you think, oh, that's what happened, and people run with it, and it's often wrong. So I urge everybody, at least in the city of Troy and around, to take a deep breath and follow the facts as best you can, and know that there will be information coming. I mean, the federal government consistently does provide quality reports on issues and disasters like this, but it does take a little bit of time.
It certainly does, and it's so early, and it's, you know, just a day later, here we are. But let's talk for a moment about what we do know in terms of when you have a change in leadership. And Congresswoman, you've seen this movie before. One president leaves, another one comes in. We have a change in leadership. Sean Duffy is new. Pete Hegseth new with the military. Is that a precarious time in this country for things to be run and things to be staffed?
You know, I want to say several things.
Sure.
First, transition, our times have changed, but there is a reason that you have a transition time between administrations. People do hope that something like this never happens, but prepare for it. But there are things that have been done that have led to where we are, and people need to pay attention to it. Government shutdowns, budget freezes, hiring freezes, lack of training, uncertainty, and now sending a letter giving everyone a buyout option and encourage them to retire and resign from their job when there's already a shortage. That is contributing to all of this too. And we shouldn't be undercutting or attacking the men and women that are in those control towers who are working under very difficult, hazardous situations. We should be asking, what is the situation? Do we need to be making fixes? What's going on at Reagan Airport? Is there too much traffic? Let's get the facts and let's make changes.
Well, the configuration was not normal for the
Correct.
time of day and the volume of traffic at that time. And we know that this air traffic controller at the time who was working two positions at the time of the crash instead of one. In terms of managing this kind of a crisis, they'll, Ethan, be looking very closely at that.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, the Congresswoman knows this airport better than you or I promise.
Yeah,
She's
absolutely.
been there, in and out of there so many times. It is an overly packed airport. I think there's too many flights going in and out of Reagan National, and something's got to be done about it. And you've got that tight airspace, and I mean, everyone's got to go up and down the river. It's a recipe for disaster. There's been disasters in the past, but the management of it and how it plays out is going to be key. There is going to be a time of transition, always in transitions. The goal, I think, is that you have the careers and the politicals. The careers keep the ship steady while the politicals get their feet frankly. I think that's how I always have viewed it from the outside. But there is some turmoil going on, and there's been a lot of projected changes, and I think that maybe plays a role. But it's not a time to blame and point fingers. I think that's the hardest thing about it. It's let's focus on the good work that is done. There will be a time when we'll know causes. There'll be liability. There'll be all of those things. But to come out on day one and to make some of those statements,
it's honestly, and let's just call it what it is.
Yeah.
I don't care if you are an ardent supporter of this president or not. No one here. This is not a king. This is a president who's an elected leader, and he can make mistakes and say the wrong things. And I think it's safe to say this was simply too early to be talking about blame and where Pete Buttigieg and talking about DEI programs when in fact you still have families who are mourning this loss. That was deeply offensive to a lot of people on both ends of the political spectrum, by the way.
I mean, to be very candid, I think what he did today, blaming, was quite frankly racist and sexist. There are very good, capable, talented people, and I quite frankly think that we've got to stop the demonization of public servants. We are all flying. Well, not everybody's flying every day, but there are people that are keeping our lives safe every day, touching it in so many different ways, from public safety to law enforcement to fire to the air traffic controllers to our health. Let's not badmouth them. Let's make sure that we've got good, talented people in those jobs who come from all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of communities, that we're giving them the support that we need.
But for all we know right now, Mayor Baker, that these air traffic controllers were working, these soldiers could have been all white men. For him to come out and say it's DEI to blame for something like this, when in fact we don't even know the details of the case, is pretty inflammatory so early on.
It's inflammatory. It's President Trump. I think he maybe needs to realize he's the president again and not a candidate. There's a little bit of rhetoric differences, I think, that happen. We're looking for a comforter-in-chief today, not someone who's going to go rally the troops today. But, millions of people voted for Donald Trump because they love that he speaks what's on his mind and has no problem saying some of these things. Millions others didn't because they can't stand it, and it terrifies them. But from my perspective, it's not how I would have done it, obviously.
The days after 9/11, we'll all remember Rudy Giuliani being coined America's mayor. We all remember George W. Bush, not necessarily a popular president at the time. Half the country voted for him, half the country didn't. He stood on top of the rubble at 9/11 and didn't blame anybody, but talked about how we have to come together. Perhaps someone can get in President Trump's ear and tell him that's what we need more than anything.
I hope so. I don't think I'm the right person, but
he doesn't listen to you, huh?
I don't know. He might.
He actually could. He actually could in a weird way. I mean that with respect.
But I do think right now we need to come together, period. That's what I'm going to ask everybody to do. We are the United States of America. United we stand, divided we fall. The fear and what I've seen in the last week while I've been home, this has been one of the longest, saddest, hardest weeks I've ever seen. As people are worried about Meals on Wheels and Head Start and seniors and child care and daycare, we're all in this together. We're community. Our strength is our unity.
Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, Mayor Ethan Baker of Troy, thank you both for joining us here today. A Republican, a Democrat, all talking about what we need to do to come together as a country on this pretty dark hour. Well, next on The Pulse, we're diving into the race for Detroit Mayor. City Council member Fred Dorhall III is here with his message for voters and goals for the city, what he says makes him different from the other two running for this office. You're watching The Pulse here on Fox 2.